and welcome to Couched in Color with Dr. Alfie. I'm your host, Dr. Alfie. Today, we're going to stay on a special topic that's really important to me, and I think it's not discussed as often as it probably should be, and that is mental health as it relates to young boys and young men of color. My guest today runs an organization that is focused on just that, and he's a mental health advocate, very public about his passion for this work. And it will be such a treat to have him talk with us a little bit about how he does his work, how he engages young men and boys, and the messages that he's able to share about men, masculinity, emotional well-being, and mental health. So stay with us. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And thanks for joining us on Couched in Color.
Dr. Alfie, thank you for having me. I know we've talked about this for a really long time, and I'm glad that we finally made it happen. So I'm grateful to be here with you. My name is Jason Rosario. I'm the founder and creative director of The Lives of Men, which is a social impact and creative agency that really at its core does men's work. And what I mean by that is we are looking to help men understand that we are much more human and try to, in the process, debunk some of the myths that we're taught around what it means to be a man. And as I do that work, we can get into how I do that work and who the types of clients are that I work with. But as I've done that work, I've realized that there is a deep relationship between the ways that we've have the pressures that we've had to perform masculinity, as it were, and the ways that we suffer from depression and anxiety, for example, right? So all of the very things that we're taught not to do as men, be emotive, be vulnerable, be soft, if you will, are all the things that you do need in order to live a healthier, more comprehensive wellness lifestyle. And so in doing the work, I think there's just a natural relationship there that I'm exploring. And just generally speaking, I think from my perspective, I suffer from depression and anxiety as well. And so I bring that personal story to the work as well.
Oh my gosh, that is powerful. And it's really amazing to have you share with us that, as you said toward the end, this is something that you have experienced yourself. So, if you don't mind talking about what was your journey to getting to a place where you felt comfortable saying publicly, right, as a man of color, that depression and anxiety are things that you yourself deal with. And the reason I ask, and you share as much or as little as you like, part of why this is important to me is because I feel like it's really critical to model for our young people, particularly young people who come from marginalized populations, that having uh, challenges around our mental health doesn't make us broken people, right? If anything, being able to articulate that, I feel like it makes us whole and allows us to be, who we are fully. Because so often, as people of color, I say this as a Black woman, I think we are put in positions where I think we can be led to feel dehumanized, right? I just think about all the horrible stuff that's been happening this week, right? Where I look at these and I have to limit how much I look at them because it's painful, right? I'm a mom, I have a son. And, so anyway, I don't want to get too far off track, but I think I would really love to hear what the journey was for you. Like I said, share as much or as little as you like about deciding as a man of color, I'm going to be open about this. And not only am I going to be open about my own journey, but I want to help other people. What was that like for you? How did you get there?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because the answer to that is there are two answers to that, really. There is the kind of more personal, longer answer, which is to say that I've been doing this work and I've been present and I've been a man on a journey uh, in this space, if you will, since I've been born, right? As a young man, just kind of always being in tune with the ways that I show up in the world, how I relate to people, how people relate to me as a 6'4" Black man from the inner city who's educated, who comes from a specific background. I've always been very sensitive to the ways that I show up. But then on a more practical side, in 2006 or 2016, I'm sorry, we know what still continues to happen today, right? We
Yep.
know that, and I think you alluded to it with Ahmaud Arbery, is the
Yes.
police shootings were occurring, right? The police murders, as they were. And so it just felt like the perfect time for me to create a platform that selfishly was something that I could use for my own healing, right? Something that I could have used as a young man growing up,
Mm-hmm.
package that lived experience in a way where other young men like myself can draw inspiration from it,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time create something that helped to debunk some of the myths around how we as Black men, Black and Latinx men, are depicted in media and in culture more broadly. And so those two worlds collided for me. And I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable or 100% comfortable in sharing kind of what my journey has been. It's
Mm-hmm.
just been a product of me doing the work. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is very uncomfortable on a daily basis, but I believe that if you're going to do this type of work, you have to be able to model what this looks like and walk that walk. And if I'm asking men to tap into their vulnerabilities, I need to be able to do that for myself. And I think that's really the motivation behind me being so open and honest about my own journey, is in hopes that people are watching it and are being inspired to be open and honest about their own journeys as well.
Oh, wow. I just am moved by the fact that you say it's not an either or. Like one day you decide I'm comfortable, I'm just going to tell everybody my business, right? What my journey has been, and or and the day before you weren't there. That's really not what it's about. I was talking yesterday with someone. We did an IG live, and one of the
Right.
things that I articulated, which I feel like is what you're saying, I was talking about resilience, right? And sometimes people think about resilience as just stuff doesn't bother you. You just sort of push through it and it's fine. And to me, that's not what resilience is. To me, resilience is you recognize and acknowledge that there are these challenges and these obstacles, and you actively find a way to cope with pushing yourself to get through it, right? So it doesn't just happen, right? You just wake up and you're resilient. You have to have some challenges in your life, and I think you have to see that you have the capacity to work through those challenges. And as you work through those challenges, you have the opportunity to build this toolkit that allows you to keep progressing. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing from you. So it's not, and I do want young people to hear from somebody, like you said, a 6'4" Black man, and I know how people perceive you because my brother's about your size and height, right? I know how people see him. And so this idea that young men and men can be vulnerable really does kind of fly in the face of how men are socialized, especially men of color, right? You're not socialized to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's funny. I like to joke that I am an entrepreneur building a business industry that doesn't yet exist. And so as this conversation around manhood and masculinity unfolds and develops, I'm doing my best to be one of the voices that kind of ushers in this new way of thinking around what it means to be a man, particularly for men of color. So the way that plays out is a couple of different ways. On one end, I do a lot of work with brands to
Okay.
help them activate the best of their brand from the inside out. And that means working with them to unlock diversity and inclusion, allyship initiatives internally with their work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Using men as the kind of the voice mouthpieces for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then externally helping them think through marketing and strategy that target men of color in
Mm-hmm.
particular. And then on the other side, I also work with men on a one-to-one basis. I created a curriculum and a coaching program where we one-on-one, and depending on what their issues are,
Mm-hmm.
kind of work through that. And the goal there is to help them self-actualize, really walk them through what they should be considering, or they could consider in their journeys, becoming a better, I don't want to say a better, but a more comprehensive self-actualized version of themselves. So, it's in workshops, public speaking,
Okay.
cooking, in whatever format that the platform allows, I take advantage of that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, can you give us, you've given us some, like a really beautiful broad overview of the work. Can you articulate any examples? Without divulging anybody's personal information, but are there any examples of activities that have happened, like maybe walk us through a workshop without divulging proprietary information? But what does a workshop look like? What can men
Mhm.
or young men expect when they come to
Mhm.
work with your organization? Just not the marketing piece or not the brand piece, but the other piece where you say, you do the engagement
Sure.
individually. Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah, so with young men, I work with New York City schools. I created a curriculum that I partnered with cities all across the 5 boroughs here in New York. And the curriculum is really focused on three things. Number one is helping them understand healthier notions of manhood,
Mm,
helping them understand how to deal with authority figures, right? So as
yes.
they move about the world as young men of color, how are they engaging with the police, for example?
Mm-hmm.
How are they engaging with their teachers? And in some cases, a lot of them come from single parent homes
Mm-hmm.
led by women. How do they engage with that?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is college preparedness, right? Or career preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that they may consider going to college, we'll work with them to prepare them for that. So a lot of that is, depending on the school, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is really just roundtables, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We show up on a weekly basis, and we ask them a lot of questions. We engage with them on conversations that most people would not have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that I've learned is that young men, we underestimate our young men in terms of the capacity to feel, and also their capacity to articulate really complex feelings. And so for me, that's my favorite part, is that to be able to sit down in front of a young man who's 15, 16 years old and engage with him on a conversation that he may not have ever had before, I think is incredibly powerful. So that's the way it shows up, is, very hands-on, very, very one-to-one, if you will.
Ah, everything about that I just love. So what it makes me think of is for parents, right? You talked about, a long time ago, I had a patient, and she's a white woman. She was in a multiracial relationship, and she taught me that she preferred, I'm just making this statement, she did not prefer to be called a single parent. She preferred to be called an independent parent, because single parent was loaded. And I thought, And so ever since then, I've just kind of stuck with that notion of independent parent. So when you talk about independent parents who are women, right? There's so many things I want to ask, but these are the two critical ones. I'm gonna try to remember the second one. I got an old brain, so it might leave me. I hope not. But one question I have is, what advice can you give to independent parents who are moms, right? Because Mother's Day is coming up. Yes, I'm real excited about that.
Yep.
But what advice would you give to moms who are independent parents rearing children? Because in my family, from the South, they say you raise chickens, you rear children. So I'm trying to remember that. Rearing children who are boys, right? Are there things that I know that there are things that you've learned from talking with these young men. And I love that you said, I wanted to say it again, we underestimate our young men. I think you are so right. In so many ways, we underestimate these boys. But what advice can you give moms who are rearing boys by themselves and want to be mindful of and take care of these boys' mental health? What kind of advice do you have for them?
That's a great question, and it's probably aside from, the lives of men, is it only for men questions I normally get.
Yeah.
This is probably the second most asked question, is from a lot of single mom, or a lot of independent moms like my own,
Yeah.
who raised 5 of us by herself.
Bless her.
I am very sensitive to that. Yeah, so I'm a product of that. So the
Yeah.
advice that I'm about to give you is not only from kind of what I've heard and from what I've learned from these young men, but it's also my own experience. I would say 3 things. Number one is, and I think I've already said it, is don't underestimate what your young men can understand and can feel and can articulate. I grew up in a home where I saw my mom be abused physically and verbally. And so that shaped me as a man. And so to be able to have a conversation with my mom, when I was younger, would have been great, to be able to help unpack some of that, as opposed to kind of owning that and letting that stay attached to me as an older man. So that's number one, is talk to your son, be open with your son. And I know that a lot of independent moms feel like, oh no, I have to be tough because I'm trying to raise a man. That I can understand that, but that can also be harmful, right? Because it makes a dynamic very unapproachable, right? Where, he can't approach you to talk. So that's number one. Number two is, something that I always say that I think it sounds very cliche, but it's very true, is don't badmouth the father. I think sometimes it's what goes unsaid that is just as damaging as what is said.
Yes.
So, if you may not love the dad, you may not agree with how he's approaching it, he may not be in your lives, but do your best to put your own feelings and ego aside for the sake of the young man. And then number 3 is show him your humanity. Be vulnerable with him. Again, if you want to try to have your young man trust you to share secrets, I think you need to also be comfortable enough to share your own secrets with him and create that dialogue and that type of relationship very early on, so that that becomes normalized in your relationship with him. So those are three things that I would say independent moms can do.
Oh, I love that. I just love the idea. Part of what it speaks to for me is as women and as parents, right? Let me just say this as parents. Doesn't matter if you're a male or female, or how you identify, because you might be a non-gender conforming parent. What's important to me is this idea of we have to be in touch with ourselves, because I think those three keys that you just shared, right? Those three, I'm gonna quote Charlemagne the God, those three jewels that you just dropped on us. I think we can't utilize those if we're not effectively in
Right.
touch with ourselves, right? We can't do it. And so you have to know what your triggers are. You have to know how that other parent you're co-parenting with, if you're co-parenting with him or her at all, impacts you, so that you can know when to expect to be triggered, and you can know how to get yourself calm before you start having conversations with your child. So I think about, I've had this conversation many times with parents in clinic, and I think about, if that parent makes you angry, the last thing you need to do is, like you just said, that's sorry, so and so, he's such and such and such. That's not what you do, right? What you do is you explain to a child. You don't act like the disagreement is non-existent. Clearly it is, because the child can see you. But I think what you do instead is you just say, look, mom and dad are having a disagreement. We have a difference of opinion about X, Y, and Z. And right now, mommy's frustrated, right? That says nothing about that other parent, what he or she did. It's not loaded. It really is just a statement of, it's just observation, right? I'm upset. We had a difference of opinion. I'm trying to work on it, because we have to model, as you said, we have to model for children that vulnerability, that openness, and that range of emotions. So the kids don't think, going back to what you said about being tough, so the kids don't get this idea that the only way I could go through life is being tough in a certain way. There are different ways to be tough, right? Tough cookie is not always just mean mugging people. So I really love that, and I'm deeply grateful for the advice. And so the second question is, are there, this is just out of curiosity, because you talked about Black and Latinx young men, right? And some people are both, right? Black, Afro, Latino. So I'm curious about, oh,
That's me.
okay, there you go. Yes, that's it. That's it. I love it. And so I'm really curious about this idea
Right.
of what are the points of divergence, right? Where might things be slightly different for Latinx men than they are for what we'll say Black American or African American men, just to try to make the distinction, because you could be Black, and as you're our beautiful example, Black and Latinx. And so I want to just make a slight distinction between Latinx, who can be of any race, and Black. When we think about Black, they could be Caribbean Black, African
Mm-hmm.
immigrant Black, or how we traditionally think of Black American, African American. What are some of those differences in boys that and men that you've seen around mental health and masculinity, if any?
Yeah, I mean, not too much of a difference. I would say the most glaring difference is the language and the cultural nuances, right? But
Okay.
I'm an Afro-Latino man, as I've mentioned, right? And so I am a Black man first and
Okay.
foremost. I am
Okay.
of African descent, and so
Yes.
at the end of the day, that's the way I look at the world and the way the world looks at me. But I
Yes.
think when it comes to things like machismo, for example, it's a
Okay.
word that we often use and hear about. I think it's the same as it's a synonym for toxic masculinity, right? What we call toxic masculinity.
Mm.
It's the same thing where it's this notion that anything that's masculine
Mm-hmm.
is celebrated and
Mm-hmm.
reinforced, and anything that's feminine
Mm.
is depreciated and less enforced or even
Mm.
shunned upon. And so I think that goes through to feelings and to mannerisms, et cetera. And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's much of a difference in terms of the ways that boys are socialized
Okay.
culturally. I think
Mm-hmm.
that there might be some nuances, but generally speaking, I think there's this very heavy pressure to perform
Mm-hmm.
masculinity that exists
Mm-hmm.
across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whether you speak Spanish or not, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's the same. It's just slightly nuanced.
Oh, I love that. So I'm glad you didn't break out in Spanish, because mi español está mal. It's horrible. I'm working on it. My French is just a smidgen better. But it's beautiful to have you acknowledge for our audience who you are as a Afro Latinx man. I just feel like that's so important. The representation, right? Because so often we don't see that full diversity. It reminds me of this issue of Latina magazine. I was a subscriber when Latina first came out. I was so geeked when that magazine came out. And I'm not Latina, but it was just the idea of representation. And I remember, I am such a fan of hers. I have to meet her one day. Now I can't remember her name, but she was on Suits. She played Jessica Pearson on Suits, and she's Cubana. And I didn't know that for a long time. She's married to Lawrence Fishburne. Anyway, her name maybe will come to me. And I remember watching her talk about what it meant to feel erased as a Black Latina. Where Spanish was her first language, where I believe her parents immigrated to the United States from Cuba, and just the cultural differences. But at the end of the day, I think for her, she said, I still identify as Black and I'm Latina, right? I can be both, and both are really critical and vitally important to me. So I love the idea of naming who we are as ethnic and cultural beings, and also putting that in context for here in the United States, what it means to be a racialized being, right? As you said, when people look at me, they see a 6'4" Black man. They don't know I'm Latinx. Even though that's an important part of who you are, that's central to who you are. So I love the idea that you can go out, especially where you live, being in New York and in New York City, in the New York area, and you can be that representation for all these Black and Latinx boys. And I just really feel like that's beautiful, and I'm so supportive of the work that you're doing. I'm grateful to Andy for getting us together. He's such a beautiful soul.
Indeed.
Big ups to Andy Reamer. And so in closing, what I want to just ask is, can you share with our audience, how can people be in touch with you? Is there a place they can find you online? Are you on like social media, the social media channels? Can you share with us how they can reach out to you? Say there are some viewers in New York who want to, once we get out of quarantine, want you to come and work with them. How can they find you?
Absolutely. So on all social media platforms, so that's that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. That's Jason with 2 underscores Rosario, and at the Lives of Men. So it's at Jason 2 underscores Rosario and at the Lives of Men. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I think one thing that I would encourage folks to do, which would be great, is if they check out the show Dear Men that I hosted and executive produced on Yahoo News.
Okay.
So in that show, I sat down with everybody from Kevin Love, the NBA superstar, to Swiss Beats, to Sean T, the superstar trainer, and we just talked about issues around masculinity, fatherhood, brotherhood, raising boys. So would love for people to check that out too, and it's called Dear Men on Yahoo News.
Awesome. So Dear Men on Yahoo News, Jason Rosario with 2 underscores between first and last name on all social media,
Right.
and then Lives of Men, it all runs together, Lives of Men?
Yeah, the Lives of Men, yes.
The Lives of Men. Okay, I'm gonna get it right. The Lives of Men all run together across all social media platforms. So, Mr. Rosario, It has been a pleasure and an honor to have you. I am so grateful to you for accepting our invitation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of what the work that you're doing and taking care of these boys and men. And then when we get offline, I might call you so you can give me some advice on my little man.
Sounds good.
So
Dr.
much.
Alfie, thank you so much for having me.
Of
really
course.
Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Okay, so there you have it, Mr. Jason Rosario with his organization, The Lives of Men. It was a real treat to be able to talk to him and have him walk through what his organization does to promote healthy masculinity in men and boys who are of Black and Latinx descent. In his case, as he shared, he's AfroLatinx himself. And so I just was really pleased to be able to learn a little bit more about what it means to be a young man in today's day and age, and how particularly moms who are independent parents, as he shared about his own journey and a lot of the young men he encounters, how moms, parents, adults, and the people in these young men's lives what they can do to promote healthy masculinity and to promote healthy mental health, healthy emotional development, and so on. So I'm really grateful to him for joining us. I'm grateful to you for joining us as always. And what I will ask you to do, as I often do, is to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Please do. Find us wherever you find your podcast fix. That can be on Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, SoundCloud, wherever you go to get that podcast fix. And you can always find us under Couched in Color. We're also across all social media platforms. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, and we are on Twitter. So please go find us and follow us there as well. In closing, let me share with you what I always share is that I'm wishing you lots of love, lots of light, and my hope is that it is always informed by good, culturally relevant science. Take care.